So at this point, Usindi is sitting in this classroom, in this lecture, while the teacher is talking, while other students are engaging. She has got her eye fixed on Luke, and baby boy is panicked. He is looking at her like she is the walking dead. As far as Luke is concerned, Cindy was on some, or should be on some yacht with these random men, having been sold into sex trafficking. As far as he was concerned, Cindy was in a different country, probably so drugged up that she probably doesn't even remember her own name. And so seeing her in this classroom looking at him like, I've got you. I know what you and your family have done. I have got you. And he's staring at her. And this lecture feels like hours and hours. And Cindy makes sure she makes him feel uncomfortable and makes sure that she makes him feel like you and the way you are not going to get away with this. Now, Cindy is very clear about one thing. Whatever she went through, that story needs to be told. She needs justice. But what she's not going to do is sit in that classroom and make a scene. She wasn't ready to tell her story publicly. In fact, she had made the decision that the way the story was going to come out was the way she wanted it to. She had to have control over it. And so she stared at him and she looked at him. Eventually, the class ended and Cindy carried on looking at him and walked out of the classroom. As soon as she walked out, Luke came running after her and he was like, can we go and talk privately? And Cindy was like, let's go. So they go to a private place to talk. And as soon as he gets her in private, Luke says to her, baby, where have you been? What happened? Talk to me. What happened? And she looks at Luke like, and she says exactly the same thing that happened with all the other girls you and your brothers have set up. And Luke looks confused and panicked and shocked, and he still wants to see if he could play Cindy, and he still wants to see if he can manipulate the situation. So he doesn't acknowledge that comment, and he says, Cindy, the last time I saw you, you and I were on a yacht having a good time at my family's all white. We were drinking. Next thing, you were drunk, you were belligerent and fighting with me. You broke up with me and you told me to leave you alone. So I left you, I gave you space. And Cindy is looking at him like, you dirty, dirty, dirty liar. You scum of the earth. You piece of work. To think I am so stupid to believe what you're saying to me. Oh, she's looking at him like, oh, you trash bag. And he can see she's not buying it. He can see that she's not buying it. He's trying to say whatever else he can and trying to, see how much does Cindy know, what's on her mind. He can see how she's looking at him and it's making him scared. He's scared. And so he's trying to talk and he's trying to almost cover that silence with words and with explanations and with, I'm going to tell you what happened. You were drunk. You don't remember. And Cindy very calmly says to him, Luke, when I was a little girl, my dad told me it can take a lifetime to build your business and your reputation, but it takes mere minutes to destroy it. I am going to destroy you and your family. I'm going to destroy you. And she walks away. She leaves Luke standing in such panic and disbelief, and he immediately picks up the phone and calls his lawyer. He tells his lawyer what's happened. The lawyer's like, right, you don't say another word. Do not talk to Cindy. You don't say another word. Calls his family to let them know something's gone on, and the mother, Mrs. Dupont, is clear that evening you need to make sure that you're at the family house for dinner. We all need to talk. Later on that evening, they meet at the Dupont residence, and obviously John and Paul come, and Mrs. and Mr. Dupont is there, and Luke are there, and obviously so is Luke. And they're all sitting around the dinner table, and they ask him, just say what were Cindy's words. Just repeat it, and he tells them. And John and Paul are looking so livid and irritated and disgusted, and almost looking at Luke like, why the hell did you bring that hoe in our space? Like, what's wrong with you? And Mr. Dupont can see there's this almost friction and tension in the air, and he says, I don't know why you guys are panicked. I will call the senior detective tomorrow and I'll have him in front of this. By the end of this week, the story should be dead. You guys need to relax. This is not our first time round. We will get this under control. This time, there's something in Mrs. Dupont that isn't as convinced. You know a mother's intuition. You know our gut instinct as women. She knew that there's just something not quite right with the situation, and it was most certainly not going to be okay, and it was most certainly not going to pan out like all the other times. Now back at the hotel where Cindy is. So she's not staying at Ray's or anything. She's now, for security reasons, back at the hotel. She's sharing a room with Nicole. So she's in a room with Nicole, and her parents are in their own room, and so is her brother. And she says to Nicole, she tells Nicole everything that happened that day. And she's just like, well, yes, she tells her, like, this is what he said. He's denying it. He's pretending like he doesn't know what happened. He's trying to convince me I got drunk. I know I was not drunk. Almost trying to kind of also say it out loud, to say, Cindy, you were not drunk. Don't allow this guy to get in your head. Nicole's like, Cindy, you were not drunk. You were not drunk. Are you trying to tell me you were drunk the time we ended up in Monaco? You were not drunk. I've met women, like really reassuring her. Like, I've met women who have been victims of these brothers. They drugged you. You were not drunk. And Cindy's like, Nicole, I think we need to record something. We need to tell our story. We need to find a way to tell our story. Now, obviously, because Nicole is injured, she'd been discharged from the hospital, but she couldn't do much because her leg was so cut up. She had stayed in the hotel, which worked perfectly for both of them because, quite frankly, outside of her deciding to show up to class that day, Cindy was also staying in the hotel for security purposes. And she says to her, we have to find a way to tell our story. And I mean, our reach, just the two of us, is not that strong. But one thing I do know is that social media is a very powerful tool, and we need to get our story out. And so they do. They spend 2 to 3 days cooped up in that room, shooting their story. Now remember, this wasn't Nicole's first incident. Nicole was trafficked many years ago. This has been her life for a while. So Nicole had a lot more information than Cindy did. And so they took turns sharing their experiences. Nicole spoke of the other woman she had met, the women who had been victims of these brothers and been victims of other people too. They spoke about the pain and the trauma of being sex trafficked, having to have sex and sleep with these men who, don't respect you. You don't like these strangers, the abuse, the rape, the story was mind-blowing. Nicole filled in all those blanks. She let it be known. And by the time they had finished, they were both looking at each other in like, how the hell did we go through all of this? And they shared a moment where they were crying and so shocked, like, how did we survive this? How did we survive this? And there was also this deep sadness inside of Cindy because hers had just been that many days, but this had been Nicole's life for years. She was so pained and so hurt by that realization. After they finished shooting the content, they already had an idea of the platforms they wanted it to come out on. They already had an idea of the people they wanted to send it to, and so they started. They packaged that video, compressed it well, and they started sharing it everywhere. They made sure they shared it to the different university pages, groups, the movements in these universities, like pro-women, feminist pages that call out elite society. They made sure this news traveled, especially to the universities, the elite university, the Ivy League universities, to ensure that people knew who this family were, knew the backstory, knew what was going on behind closed doors. I mean, it was the elite after all, where this Dupont family had that control. And so they sent it out to those groups. They made sure they posted it all over social media. They did not shy from any platform. It was on, the full version was on YouTube. They had clips on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. They went crazy with it. They made sure that they messaged, they got the news out to some of the private clubs these boys were associated with. And of course, the businesses these young men were associated with. Remember, Luke is the only one who's still in university. The other two are much older. They're into business. They are cutting some serious checks. They're collecting some serious coins. And the two were clear, whatever happens, we are going to send this information out. And they did. Within a couple of hours, this video was being talked about and talked about and talked about. Like, understand this. Cindy knew that in terms of her reach and how far she could take this, she couldn't really touch Luke's parents. The only way she could begin to start dealing with it was by addressing Luke and his brothers. And so she did. And she utilized every platform and made sure everybody who had a voice and a platform was speaking about it. And boy, oh boy, was she right. People spoke. She knew, Nicole knew, that if they had had this experience with these boys, and as popular as these boys were, surely there were other people who had stories about them too, and boy, were they right. Stories started surfacing. People started talking about how disrespectful, classist, arrogant these boys were, started posting pictures and videos of some of their drunken and drug-filled escapades, really destroying, like really taking, like they were just so immersed in showing these boys, like, we are going to expose you. We are going to expose you. There was deep gratification in that, letting other people know, by the way, I've seen these boys do that. By the way, my sister had an experience with these boys at such and such a party. By the way, these boys take drugs. By the way, their story was all over social media. The social media streets were talking. As for Mr. and Mrs. Dlamini, I mean, as the adults, they wanted to deal with their parents, and they were not interested in going to the police because they knew that there have been, I mean, there's about 11 pending cases against this family. Why are we going to run to the police? We're now going to take this into our own hands. And so they did. And Mr. Dlamini and Mrs. Dlamini, between the two of them, made it a point to find out what type of organizations and charity this family were involved in. Now listen, elite is elite is elite, but image is everything. And being able to sit there and be worshipped and praised for all the money you give to charity and all the charity events you host and these organizations that you've started and these organizations that you've partnered with, the Dlamini family knew, Mr. and Mrs. Dlamini knew, this is the way we start to attack this family. We let these organizations and charities know what these people are really about. Within a week, those organizations were dropping them. They were here, disassociating themselves from them, dropping. Mrs. Dlamini made it clear from Jump Street, if there is one thing I am here to accomplish, is I am going to disgrace this family. I am going to show them. I will disgrace them. I will disgrace them. So that's what they did. That's what they focused on. Jabu, her brother, Mr. Dlamini's brother-in-law, was clear. No, Mina, I want to hit them where it hurts, and that's in their pockets. I'm going to get this family. Now, remember I told you he was very thuggish. He knew ins and outs. He knew corners. He knew dark places. He knew where to go to get things done. And so he worked very closely with that senior detective, and he managed to put together a brief but to the point folder of all the dirt and just all the dirt that people had to say and investigations proved against this family. He put it in a folder, and he made sure that he went to the top businesses that he knew this family were in business with. The businesses he knew, they were making some serious coins, and he addressed these folders to the CEOs of these companies and went personally to drop them off. Guys, in no time, these businesses were canceling contracts with the Dupont family. They were dropping them, disassociating. They were outright saying, we will not be in partnership with any other business that chooses to continue to do business with this family. They're sick, the this, the that, the this. He made sure business-wise, I am going to take their riches. I am going to take these people's coins, because that's their power. That's always been their power, the money. That's how they've managed for so long to get away with what they've gotten away with. And they knew that. They knew that they could hide behind this lavish lifestyle and this money. And so he made it a point to get in there. But no. Ujabu was not done. He was not done. The next person he wanted was Mr. Pierre. The family's a lawyer. When Mrs. Dlamini had come from SA and they'd first met in that hotel, and he was first going to give her all that information he'd found out about Cindy. One of the things Mrs. Dlamini told him was how Mr. Pierre treated her when she was trying to find Cindy, how he was dismissive, how he was helping Luke cover up, how he definitely knew something and was clearly covering this family's dirt. They knew, and when they went back into the books and investigations, Mr. Pierre had been their lawyer for a very long time. So they knew this man knew enough dirt and filth, and he had spent his time protecting and covering this family's back. And so Jabu was like, that's my next one. I'm going for this guy. He was the nail that sealed the coffin. And so sure enough, he did. He located Mr. Pierre. By that time, this family were in the news. They were all over the news and all over social media. People were joining in on this hate train. They were attaching to this bandwagon. They were making sure they pulled this family down. You know when they say the fall from grace is far? I mean, they made sure they went in there to let people know how low down and dirty this family were. So by the time Jabu approached Mr. Pierre knew there was nothing left to do. He knew, he could see, he's a lawyer, he knows how these things work. He could see this family were finished. They were finished. There was nothing he could do at this point. Nothing. There was nothing he could do. So he approached him and he was like, let's go. Him and Mr. Pierre pulled up to the hotel where the family was staying, and of course they had a lot of security. And he took Mr. Pierre into a room with Nicole and with Cindy, and obviously allowed them to have a conversation with him, but supervised. He stayed, and Nicole and Cindy had their opportunity to ask him questions and to get him to fill in blanks, to get him to pretty much confirm that, yes, I have been a very big part in helping this family get away with a lot of their filth and this and this and this. And this was the story about Amber Riley. They questioned him. Now remember, once again, Nicole had a lot of backstory. She had met some of these women. She had met them. She had met some of these women who had been a victim or victims of this Dupont family. So she knew the right questions to ask. And of course, while Mr. Pierre's talking, they're recording everything. They make it a point to record everything so that he can't backtrack and deny anything. And again, they're not looking to go to the police with this. They want this on social media. They know that this family is known for going and squashing cases and going and derailing cases and silencing people, silencing families. So their thing is, as long as we can get it out on social media and get enough people talking about it and enough businesses, we're good. So he said everything they needed to hear. He filled in all the blanks. He gave them information that they weren't even aware of. So by the time they had finished speaking to Mr. Pierre and he left, they were editing the content. They made sure they put it into a good form. They made sure by the time it hit social media, this was the part 2 of this story about the Dupont family. And that video went viral. Can you guys imagine? It's one thing to get information from a detective. It's one thing to get information from victims. It's a whole entire ball game, different ball game, when you're getting information from an insider, when you're getting information from a lawyer, from somebody who was there to witness and see he knew this family were finished. He knew his career was finished. At this point, he knew he was going to go to jail too for helping this family cover up everything they had done. He knew he was going to be disbarred. He knew it. He knew that he went far beyond his position as a lawyer to remain in the good graces with this family. He got too close, he got too involved with things, and some of the times he did things he wasn't even asked to do just to show his loyalty because the money was good. He loved being so close to this family. They took care of him well, and so he made sure he took care of them. So they had all this information. By the time that part 2 hit, it was viral. The story was done. It was viral. They got to hear the more factual information. When all of this was going on, because remember, Nicole and Cindy are not leaving the hotel. Everything is happening from the comfort of their room. By the time all of this had hit social media pages and was out in the public, Cindy and Nicole were just in that bedroom looking at each other. They did not for a second realize how far the story would go. They didn't realize how deep the whole thing would be. They just didn't know. Cindy got a message from the university, correspondence from the university to say that Luke had been officially, expelled from the university, that he was no longer welcome there. They've removed him, and they showed their concern and their horror about the situation, and reiterated that they would love to have Cindy back, and they've got amazing counselors and therapists, and they're happy to even pay for any extra counseling she may need. The university stood behind Cindy. They wanted to make sure she was okay. While all of this was going on, Nicole's family, she had managed to reach out to her family. They found her. And so they made their way to Switzerland to fetch Nicole. The last day Nicole and Cindy spent together, they were just embracing each other and crying. And it was deeper than just the trauma. It was that feeling of, we got them. We got them. When you go against a family this powerful, the last thing you think is that you're going to get them. The last thing you think is that you can bring them down this way. They got them. And so they embraced, and eventually Nicole left and Cindy was there. And, her family, she got to talking with her family, and they said to her, Cindy, we don't want to tell you that you have to come back home. We think through this, you are grown enough to make your own decisions. So what do you want? And Cindy said, I would rather do some correspondence learning, come home for a bit to rest, and to, start therapy and start healing from this and processing what has happened. But next year, I'm definitely coming back to Switzerland, and I'm going back to that med school. I'm not going to allow this boy to take that away from me. I worked hard, and I worked for many years just to make sure I could get into a school like this. And her family supported her. They supported her. They respected her. Even her uncle Jabu was like, you know what? And when you do decide that you want to go back, I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to be here for you guys. I think I've been saying Jabu when it was Tabo. Please excuse me, because sometimes these stories. But he let them know that, she let them know that I'm staying, and he let her know that however this goes down, I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to be here for you. And he was. So Cindy made her way back home with her family. She started getting the therapy she needed, the healing process, the processing process, and without even, setting out to do that, charges were brought against that Dupont family. And the last time Usindi heard, the brothers were going to jail and the family, well, the parents were on trial.